The Limit of Words. Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. That sentence was written in a prisoner of war camp in Italy in 1918. The man who wrote it had spent 80 pages building a logical system to map everything that language can say. And at the very end, having built the whole thing, he closed the book with that one line. The most important things he had concluded cannot be said at all. The book was the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. The author was Ludwig Wittgenstein, and the line you just heard is the most commonly quoted version from an earlier translation by C.K. Ogden. The scholarly text reads, "What we cannot speak about, we must pass over in silence." It is one of the most famous closing lines in 20th century philosophy. If you have ever tried to describe the most important moment of your life, the death of someone you loved, the first time you held your child, a silence in nature that stopped you cold, and found that words failed you, then you have stood at the edge Wittgenstein spent his life mapping. Tonight, two thinkers, separated by 2,400 years and by almost everything else, culture, method, purpose, language, they arrived at the same place, the same silence, and they had entirely different things to say about what it means. Chapter 1. The Picture and Its Limit. Before we get to the ideas, you need to know something about the man. Ludwig Wittgenstein was born in Vienna in 1889, into what was probably the wealthiest family in the Habsburg Empire. His father, Karl Wittgenstein, was an industrialist nicknamed the Austrian Iron King. The Wittgenstein fortune was second in Europe only to the Rothschilds. Brahms played in their drawing room. Klimt painted his sister's wedding portrait. By any external measure, Ludwig was born into a kind of privilege that is almost difficult to imagine. He was also born into a kind of suffering that is almost difficult to imagine. 3 of his brothers died by suicide. Hans, in 1902, vanished from a boat in Chesapeake Bay. Rudolf, in 1904, drank cyanide in a Berlin bar after asking the pianist to play a particular song. Kurt, in 1918, shot himself on the Italian front rather than be captured. Of the 5 Wittgenstein brothers, only 2 survived to old age. Ludwig was one of them. When the First World War began, Ludwig volunteered for the Austrian army. He served on the Eastern Front, then the Italian Front, often requesting the most dangerous posts. He was decorated for bravery multiple times. He also carried, throughout the war, a single book in his rucksack, Leo Tolstoy's short retelling of the Gospels, called The Gospel in Brief. In his diary, on the 11th of October 1914, he wrote that he carried it always with me, like a talisman, and the whole time he was killing and almost being killed, he was also working on a book of his own. A book about logic, a book about what language can and cannot do. In November of 1918, with the war almost over, he was captured by Italian forces near Trento. He was held first in a camp at Como, then transferred to a larger camp at Cassino. He had the manuscript of his book with him. From the camp, he wrote to Bertrand Russell, the most famous philosopher in England at the time and his former teacher, to tell him the work was finished. He was released in August of 1919. The book was published 2 years later in German, then translated into English. Wittgenstein himself believed, having finished it, that he had solved all the essential problems of philosophy, so he stopped doing philosophy. He gave away his enormous inherited fortune, gave it to his siblings, who were already rich, specifically because he thought giving it to the poor would only corrupt them. He trained as a primary school teacher and spent 6 years teaching mathematics to village children in rural Austria. After that, a year as a gardener at a monastery. Then he designed and built a house for his sister in Vienna, working on the dimensions of door handles and radiators with the same obsessive precision he had once brought to logic. Only in 1929 did he return to Cambridge and to philosophy. By then, he had begun to suspect that the book he had written in the trenches, the book he believed had solved everything, was wrong about almost everything central. He would spend the next 22 years writing a second philosophy that was, in many ways, a sustained argument against his first. Hold all of that, the family, the war, the talisman, the village schoolhouse, in mind. Because the book we are about to discuss was not written by an academic. It was written by a man who had stood close to death, repeatedly, and was trying to draw a map of what could be said about the things that mattered most. Here is the central idea of the Tractatus, in language anyone can follow. Wittgenstein believed that language works by sharing logical structure with the world. A sentence is like a picture, the way a map shares structure with the territory it represents. Same junctions, same relations, same shape, even though the map is paper and the territory is land. A meaningful sentence shares logical structure with the fact it describes. The cat is on the mat, pictures an arrangement of things. There is bread in the kitchen, pictures another. Language, on this view, is a system for picturing facts about the world. This is called the picture theory of meaning, and it has a very sharp consequence. If a meaningful sentence is one that pictures a possible fact, then anything that cannot be pictured as a fact cannot be meaningfully said. You can say, the bread is in the kitchen. You can say, the bread is not in the kitchen. You can say, every loaf of bread in this kitchen weighs less than a kilogram. All of those are sentences about possible arrangements of things in the world. But what about this? It is good that there is bread in the kitchen. Where is the goodness? You can describe the bread, weigh it, photograph it, slice it. You cannot point to the goodness. Goodness is not an additional fact about the bread sitting next to its weight and its position. Goodness is something else entirely. This is where Wittgenstein's logic begins to do something strange. Watch what happens. Proposition 6.4. All propositions are of equal value. Inside the world of facts, no fact is more important than any other. The fact that there is bread in the kitchen and the fact that there is a war in Europe are, as facts, on the same level. Logic does not rank them. Value does not live inside the realm of facts. Proposition 6.41. The sense of the world must lie outside the world. In the world, everything is as it is, and everything happens as it does happen. In it, there is no value, and if there were, it would be of no value. If there is a value which is a value, it must lie outside all happening and being so, for all happening and being so is accidental. What makes it non-accidental cannot lie within the world, for otherwise this would again be accidental. Read that slowly. Wittgenstein is saying something extraordinary. The sense of the world, what gives it meaning, what makes life worth living, what makes anything matter, cannot itself be a fact inside the world, because facts inside the world are just contingencies. They could have been otherwise. Whatever makes life matter is not one more contingent fact among the others. It is of a different order entirely, and therefore, by the rules of his own system, it cannot be put into language. Language pictures facts. Value is not a fact. Proposition 6.44. It is not how things are in the world that is mystical, but that it exists. That sentence stops me every time. It is not how things are arranged, not the contents, not the news, not the events. It is the bare fact that anything is at all. That existence is, rather than not. Wittgenstein, the logician, calls this mystical. He uses the word, Proposition 6.522. There are indeed things that cannot be put into words. They make themselves manifest. They are what is mystical. Notice what he does not say. He does not say, there is nothing there. He does not say, these things are illusions. He says they cannot be put into words, but they show themselves. They manifest. This is Wittgenstein's small, careful gesture beyond the limit of his own system. There is something there. He is just very precise about the fact that language cannot reach it. And then comes one of the strangest moves in the history of philosophy, Proposition 6.54. My propositions serve as elucidations in the following way. Anyone who understands me eventually recognizes them as nonsensical when he has used them as steps to climb up beyond them. He must, so to speak, throw away the ladder after he has climbed up it. He must transcend these propositions, and then he will see the world aright. Read that again. The book you have just spent 80 pages reading. The book whose author is widely considered one of the most precise thinkers of the 20th century. That book has just told you that his own propositions are nonsensical. They were a ladder. You used them to climb. Now throw the ladder away. Some scholars, Cora Diamond, James Conant, argue that the Tractatus was therapeutic from its very first page, that its sentences were never secret doctrine, but a ladder of nonsense meant to cure the urge to theorize about what cannot be theorized about. On this reading, the famous gap between the early and late Wittgenstein shrinks. Both works aim to dissolve confusion rather than build systems. We will come back to this. For now, just notice what the ladder image is doing. It is saying the book is a tool. The tool destroys itself in the using. And then, the last line, Proposition 7, the final sentence of the book. In the scholarly translation, what we cannot speak about we must pass over in silence. That is the entire proposition. There is no chapter 7. There is no further argument. After 80 pages of dense logical analysis, one sentence stands alone on the page, and the book ends. He had built the whole system, and he had built it precisely so that, at the end, he could point at what the system could not contain, and tell you to be silent in front of it. Wittgenstein died of cancer in Cambridge on the 29th of April, 1951. He had been staying in the home of his doctor and his doctor's wife. He had refused to die in a hospital. His last conscious words, reported by Mrs. Bevan and recorded by his student and friend Norman Malcolm in a memoir published 7 years later, were these: "Tell them I've had a wonderful life, the man who reached the edge of language, the man who insisted that the most important things cannot be said. At the end, he said something, not a doctrine, just a testimony, a wonderful life." Now we go back 2,400 years to a man who reached the same edge from a completely different direction. Chapter 2. A Different Arrival. 2,400 years before the Tractatus, in the Ganges plain of northern India, a man sat under a tree and, by his own account, became free of suffering. The tradition tells us he was born a prince named Siddhartha Gautama. The tradition tells us he left a palace, tried the extremes of luxury and the extremes of asceticism, found both unsatisfactory, and eventually sat down with the intention not to rise until he had understood. We will not adjudicate the tradition tonight. What matters is what he taught for the next 45 years, until his death, and how again and again, when he was pushed to the edge of what could be said, he chose silence, but it was a different kind of silence, and the difference matters. Wittgenstein's silence was the silence of a method that had reached its own limit. He had built a logical system to map what language can picture. The system, by its own internal logic, ran out at the edge of value, meaning the mystical. The silence at the end of the Tractatus is the silence of a tool that has been honestly described as having a boundary, and the boundary having been honestly drawn. The Buddha's silence comes from somewhere else entirely. It does not come from logical analysis at all. It comes from contemplative investigation, from sitting, watching the mind, watching experience arise and pass, watching the conditions that give rise to suffering and the conditions that lead to its cessation. The Buddha is not building a system to picture facts. He is offering a method for ending a particular kind of suffering. And when language fails him at the edge, it fails for different reasons. Consider one of his most famous teachings on silence, the discourse known as the Kulamalunkyya Sutta, the shorter discourse to Malunkyaputta. In the Pali Canon, it is the 63rd discourse of the Majjhima Nikaya. MN 63. A monk named Malunkyaputta comes to the Buddha in some distress. He has been thinking. He has compiled the list of questions the Buddha has never answered. Is the cosmos eternal or not eternal? Is it finite or infinite? Is the soul the same as the body or different? Does an awakened being exist after death or not exist, or both or neither? Malunkyaputta has decided that if the Buddha will not answer these questions, he will leave the community and go back to the lay life. He delivers something like an ultimatum. The Buddha listens, and then he does something interesting. He does not engage the questions on their own terms. He tells a story. Imagine, the Buddha says, a man shot with a poisoned arrow. His friends and family rush to bring a surgeon, but the man stops them. He says, I will not let this arrow be removed until I know who shot it. What was his caste, his family, his height? What kind of bow was it? What kind of feathers on the arrow? What kind of poison? The man, the Buddha says, would die before any of that information could be gathered. The man would die with the arrow still in him. The teaching is pragmatic, not logical. The Buddha is not saying these questions are nonsensical. He is not saying they cannot be answered. He is saying they are not relevant to the urgent task. They do not conduce to the goal, which is the ending of suffering here and now. They do not lead to disenchantment, to dispassion, to cessation, to direct knowledge, to the holy life. So he sets them aside. Notice how different this is from Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein, in Proposition 7, says, what we cannot speak about, we must pass over in silence. The silence is forced by the structure of language itself. The Buddha in this discourse says, I do not declare these things, not because I cannot, necessarily, but because declaring them would not help you. The silence is forced by the urgency of liberation. Different mechanism, different motivation, but, and this is what makes the comparison live, the same outward shape. A teacher reaches a question and declines to answer it. The same formula appears in a longer discourse, the Pottapada Sutta, the 9th in the Digha Nikaya, DN 9. A wanderer named Pottapada raises the same kinds of speculative questions. The Buddha gives the same kind of answer. These questions, he says, are not conducive to the goal, not basic to the holy life. They do not lead to disenchantment, to dispassion, to cessation, to direct knowledge, to awakening, to unbinding. So the Buddha sets them aside. This is the Buddha's first kind of silence, the pragmatic silence. The silence of a teacher who refuses to be drawn into speculation that will not heal his student. But there is a second kind of silence in the suttas, and this one comes closer to Wittgenstein's territory. Consider the Agivacchagotta Sutta, the 72nd discourse of the Majjhima Nikaya. MN 72. A wanderer named Vacchagotta is asking the Buddha about what happens to an awakened being after death. He runs through the 4 possibilities. Does the awakened one exist after death? not exist both or neither. The Buddha sets all four aside. Vacchagotta, understandably confused, asks why. The Buddha responds with a question of his own. Imagine, he says, a fire burning in front of you. While it burns, you can say what it burns from. Wood, perhaps. Now suppose the fire goes out. The Buddha asks, in which direction has the fire gone? North, south, east, west. Vacchagotta says, that does not apply. The question is wrongly posed. A fire going out has not gone anywhere. There is no direction for it to have gone in. The categories of direction simply do not reach the situation of a fire that is no longer burning. The Buddha says, just so, Vaccha, just so. The categories you are using exists, does not exist, both neither, do not apply to an awakened being beyond death. He goes deeper than your categories. He is deep, the Buddha says, like the ocean, hard to fathom. This is the second kind of silence. The silence at the edge of what categories can describe. It is much closer to Wittgenstein. It is not just that the question is irrelevant to liberation. It is that the question itself, in its grammatical structure, does not apply to the territory it is trying to reach. And here is where the parallel to the Tractatus sharpens. Both Wittgenstein and the Buddha, when pushed to the ultimate question, give an answer with a strange logical shape. They do not say, I do not know. They do not say, no one knows. They say, that does not apply. The question framed in those terms does not reach the thing it is asking about, but the Buddha goes one step further than Wittgenstein. He does not stop at the silence. He gestures, with extraordinary care, at what lies on the other side. There are two short passages, both in a small book called the Udana, the Inspired Utterances, that say what they say more clearly than almost anything else in the canon. They are short. We will read them carefully. The first is the 8th chapter, first discourse, Udana 8.1. Ud 8.1. The Buddha says in Thanissaro Bhikkhu's translation, there is that dimension, monks, where there is neither earth nor water nor fire nor wind, neither dimension of the infinitude of space, nor dimension of the infinitude of consciousness, nor dimension of nothingness, nor dimension of neither perception nor non-perception, neither this world, nor the next world, nor sun, nor moon. And there, I say, there is neither coming, nor going, nor staying, neither passing away nor arising, unestablished, unevolving, without support. This, just this, is the end of stress. Listen to what that does. It is one of the most striking pieces of negative description in religious literature. There is something. The Buddha will not deny that. He says there is. But every single thing you might try to say about it, he negates. Not earth, not water, not fire, not wind, not any of the four formless attainments, the most subtle states a meditator can reach. Not this world, not the next, not coming, not going, not staying, not arising, not passing away. What is left? Nothing you can picture, nothing you can locate, nothing you can describe in positive terms. And yet, the Buddha begins the passage by saying, there is. The second passage is even shorter. Udana 8.3. Ud 8.3. The Buddha says, there is, monks, an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unfabricated. If there were not that unborn, unbecome, unmade, unfabricated, there would not be the case that emancipation from the born, become, made, fabricated, would be discerned. But precisely because there is an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unfabricated, emancipation from the born, become, made, fabricated, is discerned. Stop on the first three words. There is. The Buddha is not silent here. He is not refusing to declare. He is making a positive declaration. There is something, and then describing it only by what it is not. The unborn, the unbecome, the unmade, the unfabricated. 4 negations, each one cutting off a way the conditioned world might try to creep back in, and then he gives the reason this matters. If there were not such a thing, escape from the conditioned would not be discernible. The very fact that liberation is possible is, for the Buddha, evidence that there is something beyond the conditioned to be liberated into. This is what makes the comparison to Wittgenstein live but also break. Wittgenstein at Propositions 6522 says, "There are, indeed, things that cannot be put into words. They make themselves manifest. They are what is mystical." He gestures. He says there is something, but he provides no path. He says, "Be silent." The Buddha says, "There is an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unfabricated, and emancipation from the conditioned is discernible. There is something, and there is a path. We will come to that path. For now, hold the difference." Both teachers reach the edge of language. Both teachers say something is there. One stops, the other points, and walks. A note before we move on. There is no evidence, none, that Wittgenstein ever engaged Buddhism directly. He did not read Pali. He did not study Sanskrit. His diaries do not mention the Buddha. The library of his life does not contain a Dhammapada with marginalia, but there is an indirect thread. As a teenager, around the age of 16, Wittgenstein read the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. His student G.E.M. Anscombe later said that Schopenhauer struck the young Wittgenstein as, in her words, fundamentally right about the world as representation. The traces of Schopenhauer in the Tractatus are visible to scholars, particularly in the passages about the limits of the world, the position of the self as a limit rather than an object in the world, and the gestures toward the mystical at the end of the book. And Schopenhauer himself acknowledged in his own writing deep affinities between his philosophy and Buddhist thought. He read the early translations of Buddhist texts coming into Europe in the 19th century. He saw the resonances. He named them. So there is a thread. Buddhism into Schopenhauer, into the young Wittgenstein, reading Schopenhauer in fin de siècle Vienna, into the Tractatus written in a trench in 1916, a thread, not a line, not influence in any strict sense. We do not say Wittgenstein knew Buddhism. We say only that some current of the same ancient observation, that what matters most cannot be put into ordinary words, found its way by an unmapped route into the mind of a young man reading philosophy by candlelight. That is the most we can say honestly, and it is enough. So we have 2 teachers at the same edge. Both have reached the place where language fails. Both gesture at what is on the other side. Wittgenstein's gesture is, there is something there, but I have nothing more to say. The Buddha's gesture is, there is something there. Here is what it is not. Here is why it matters. And here is a path. Now we look at where these 2 paths run together for a stretch and where they finally part. Chapter 3. Where they meet. What follows is not a claim that Wittgenstein and the Buddha taught the same thing. They did not. We will get to where they part in the next chapter. What follows is 3 places where 2 men, working with completely different tools, completely different aims, in completely different centuries, arrived at the same structural observation about language and what lies beyond it. The convergences are real. They are also limited. Both of those facts matter. The first place they meet is in what philosophers of religion sometimes call the via negativa, the way of negation. The use of language not to describe the ultimate, but to fence it off from what it is not. Recall Wittgenstein's proposition 6.522. There are, indeed, things that cannot be put into words. They make themselves manifest. They are what is mystical. He's being precise. He's not saying the things that cannot be put into words are nothing. He's not saying they are illusions. He's saying they cannot be put into words. The limit is not a failure of the things. The limit is a feature of language. What language pictures is facts. What is not a fact does not get pictured. It still is. It just shows itself rather than being said. Now recall the Buddha at Udana 8.3. There is, monks, an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unfabricated, same shape. There is something. And every positive predicate one might attach to it gets negated. Not born, not become, not made, not fabricated. 4 negations, like 4 walls of a small clearing where one might point at what no positive word can name. Both teachers are using the negative. Both are doing it deliberately. Neither is saying I do not know. Neither is saying no one knows. They are saying, and saying carefully, there is something here that the conditioned categories of language cannot contain. We are not being vague. We are being exact about a kind of thing that exactness, in the ordinary sense, will fail to grasp. This is not failure. This is precision. When a sculptor wants to show a shape that does not fit conventional forms, sometimes the most accurate thing is to carve away everything that is not the shape. The result is what scholars of religion sometimes call apophatic description. Saying what something is not, because saying what it is would falsify it. Both Wittgenstein and the Buddha, at the edge of language, do exactly this. The honest asymmetry is this. Wittgenstein arrives at the negative by following logic. He is mapping language and finding where the map ends. The Buddha arrives at the negative by following contemplative investigation. He is mapping the experience and finding where the conditioned ends. Same destination, the negative path, by different roads. The second place they meet is in the image of language as a tool to be used and then put down. This is the deepest structural parallel between the two thinkers, and the one that will show most clearly in the next chapter, where they finally diverge. Wittgenstein at proposition 6.54. Anyone who understands him must, so to speak, throw away the ladder after he has climbed up it. The book is a ladder. You climb, you throw it away. What remains is not the ladder, but the view from the top. The Buddha, in the 22nd discourse of the Majjhima Nikaya, the Alaggadupama Sutta, the snake simile discourse, MN 22, gives almost the same image, in a different form. He says the Dhamma, the teaching itself, is like a raft. A man comes to a great expanse of water. The near shore is dangerous, the far shore is safe. He has no boat, no bridge. So he gathers grass, twigs, branches, leaves. He binds them into a raft, and using his hands and feet, he crosses. On reaching the far shore, what does he do with the raft? The Buddha sets up the question and answers it. The wise man does not carry the raft on his head out of gratitude. He does not say, "This raft has served me well, I will keep it forever." He leaves it at the shore, or perhaps draws it up onto the land and walks on. The raft was for crossing. Once the crossing is done, the raft is set down. The Buddha says, "In the same way, monks, I have taught the Dhamma like a raft, for the purpose of crossing over, not for the purpose of holding on." Notice, 2 teachers, 2 of the most precise thinkers in their respective traditions. Both reached the same image, the teaching, the system. The book is an instrument. You use it. You do not worship it. You do not mistake the instrument for the destination. There is a subtle but important detail in the Buddhist version, drawn out particularly by the translator Thanisaro Bhikkhu. The raft must be grasped properly and held firmly while crossing. You do not abandon the raft mid-river. You hold it until you have arrived. Only then do you set it down. This is the Theravada reading. The teaching is to be held tightly until liberation, then released. It is different from some Mahayana readings that emphasize letting go of the raft as part of the crossing. So here is the parallel in full. The ladder and the raft. Both are tools for getting from a lower place to a higher one. Both are to be used and then set down. Neither is to be confused with the destination. The man who clings to the ladder after he has climbed is in the same kind of error as the man who carries the raft on his head after he has crossed, but the destinations are completely different. The ladder of the Tractatus brings you back to the same world, which you now see aright, clearly, without the philosophical confusions that drove you to the ladder in the first place. The raft of the Buddha brings you to a different shore entirely. The unbinding, the cessation of suffering, the unconditioned that the unborn passage describes. Same image, same gesture, different topology. The ladder is vertical and circular. You climb up and come back down with clearer eyes. The raft is horizontal and one way. You cross and you do not come back. Hold this image. It is the cleanest single comparison in this whole conversation. Use, do not cling. Climb the ladder, cross on the raft, and then, in both cases, set the instrument down. There is one more layer to add here, from the late Wittgenstein. In the philosophical investigations, having largely abandoned the picture theory of the Tractatus, he writes, at section 43, that for a large class of cases, though not for all, in which we employ the word meaning, it can be defined thus: the meaning of a word is its use in the language. Meaning is not the hidden essence a word points at. Meaning is what the word does in the practice of a community of speakers. The word pain does not get its meaning by referring to a private inner object. It gets its meaning by how it functions in the life of people who use it. When it is appropriate to say what it leads others to do, how it weaves into ordinary activity, and then, in section 38, one of the most famous lines in the investigations, philosophical problems arise when language goes on holiday. Words have a job to do in ordinary life. The word knowing, the word self, the word meaning. They work well in the context where they are used in practice. The philosophical problems arise when those words are lifted out of their working context and asked to do metaphysical labor they were never built for. Language on holiday is language not at work, and the idling creates illusions of profundity that dissolve once we put the words back to work. The Buddha's raft is a teaching about practice. So is the late Wittgenstein's account of meaning. Both are saying the function of language is to do something for someone in a context. Take it out of the context, and it begins to misfire. The asymmetry here is real and honest. Late Wittgenstein grounds meaning in community practice, what people do together. The Buddha's raft is grounded in something specific, the project of crossing from suffering to its cessation. The use the Buddha cares about is soteriological. The use Wittgenstein cares about is grammatical. Same warning against clinging to language, different stakes. The third place they meet is in their shared answer to a certain kind of question. Their answer is, do not give a better answer. Dissolve the question. Wittgenstein at section 309 of the Investigations, and this may be the single most quoted line in his late work, writes, "What is your aim in philosophy? To show the fly the way out of the fly bottle. A fly bottle is an old device, a glass jar shaped to catch insects, with the opening curving inward so that the fly, once inside, beats against the curved sides looking for a way out, never seeing that the opening is right above it. The fly's problem is not that there is no exit. The fly's problem is that it is asking the wrong question. It is searching where the answer cannot be. The way out is not through better searching in the same place. The way out is to look in a different direction entirely. Philosophy, for the late Wittgenstein, is largely this. The traditional questions: what is the self? What is meaning? How does language hook onto reality? Are not bad questions in the sense that they cannot be answered. They are bad questions in the sense that they are searching in the wrong direction. The job of philosophy is not to give a better answer. It is to show the fly the open neck of the bottle, the place it never looked, so that the question dissolves. Now compare this to the poisoned arrow. Malunkyaputa's questions to the Buddha. Is the cosmos eternal? Is the soul the same as the body? Does the awakened one exist after death? Those questions are, on the surface, requests for information. They look like ordinary questions. The Buddha treats them as poisoned arrows. The man shot with the arrow does not need more information about the arrow. He needs the arrow removed. The questions Malunkyaputta is asking will not get him the answer they look like they are asking for. They will keep him searching where the answer cannot be found, while the suffering they were supposed to relieve continues unabated. The Buddha does not give better answers to those questions. He sets them aside, not because they are nonsensical, because they are the wrong direction. Both teachers, then, share the same diagnostic move. When confronted with a certain class of questions about the ultimate, questions whose grammar misleads, questions that keep the questioner spinning, neither offers a better answer. Both perform the same kind of intervention. They tried to show the questioner that the question itself was misformed or misdirected or beside the point. The honest asymmetry is in the ground of the move. Wittgenstein dissolves the question because, on his analysis, the question is grammatically confused. It has the surface shape of a question, but it does not have the logical shape of one that could be answered. The Buddha sets the question aside because, on his analysis, the question is soteriologically useless. It does not lead toward the ending of suffering. Same move, different reasoning, but the move is the same. Show the fly the way out, pull the arrow. So those are the three meetings. The via negativa as structural feature, not failure. Language as a tool for crossing, not a mirror to be polished. The dissolution of certain questions rather than the better answering of them. If we stopped here, we would have a tidy story. Two great teachers, separated by 2400 years, arriving at the same observations about language and its limits. But that story would be false. Because in each of those three places where they meet, there is also a place where they part. And in the next chapter, we look honestly at where exactly the two paths diverge, and why the divergence is more important than the convergence. Chapter 4. Where they part. The convergences were real. So are the differences. And on the most generous reading of Wittgenstein, the differences are still profound. They are not about misunderstanding. They are about what kind of project each man was undertaking. The first place they part is the most fundamental. It is the question of what, if anything, can be done about what lies on the other side of the silence. Wittgenstein, at proposition 6.522, read again, says, "There are indeed things that cannot be put into words. They make themselves manifest. They are what is mystical." Read generously. This is not the statement of a flat reductionist. Wittgenstein is not saying there is nothing on the other side of language. He is saying something is there, and it shows itself in a life, in the texture of how a person lives, in the way ethics and aesthetics make themselves felt without being able to be said. The ineffabilist reading, defended by scholars like Elizabeth Anscombe and P.M.S. Hacker, takes this proposition seriously. There is something at the limit. It manifests. It is what is mystical. But here is what Wittgenstein does not do. He does not say how to get there. He does not provide a method. He does not say, if you sit in a certain way, if you investigate experience in a certain manner, you will arrive at this and you will know it directly. His mystical shows itself within a life. It is not a destination one can reach by following a path. So the fence, and this is the metaphor I want you to hold. The fence has a small window in it. Through the window, you can see that something is there. You can even, on the most generous reading, feel its manifestation. But the fence has no gate. There is no key. There is no path through. Now the Buddha. Udana 8.3. There is, monks, an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unfabricated. If there were not that unborn, emancipation from the born, become, made, fabricated, would not be discerned. The Buddha is not stopping at the manifestation. He is saying, this is reachable. Liberation from the conditioned is discernible. And he spends 45 years teaching a specific path by which it is reached. The Noble Eightfold Path: right view, right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. SN 45.8 is not a manifestation that shows itself in a life. It is a path that is walked. That is the difference. The fence has a window. The doorway has a key. Wittgenstein points at the limit and falls silent. The Buddha points at the limit and says, here is how you cross. The second place they part follows from the first. It is the question of what philosophy itself is for. The late Wittgenstein, in the Philosophical Investigations at section 124, makes a statement that has scandalized philosophers ever since. Philosophy may in no way interfere with the actual use of language. It can, in the end, only describe it, for it cannot give it any foundation either. It leaves everything as it is. This is one of the most quoted sentences in late Wittgenstein. Philosophy leaves everything as it is. Its function is not to transform the world. Its function is not to deliver the philosopher to a better state of being. Its function is to dissolve confusions, to show flies the way out of bottles, to remove the bumps the understanding has gotten by running its head against the limits of language. When the work is done, you do not become a new kind of person. You become a person who has stopped being confused about certain questions. Compare this to the Buddha. The Four Noble Truths are not propositions to be understood and then set aside. They are a diagnosis, a cause, a possibility, and a treatment. The Fourth Noble Truth, the Eightfold Path, is a regimen. You walk it, and walking changes who you are. The walking culminates, the tradition says, in Nibbana, in the actual cessation of greed, hatred, and delusion in this very life, in a person whose suffering is, by his own report, and the report of those around him, ended. These are not the same kind of project. Wittgenstein's philosophy leaves everything as it is. The Buddha's path leaves nothing as it was. One offers a way out of philosophical confusion. The other offers a way out of suffering. These are not the same thing. They are not even close to the same thing. And it would be a kind of category error to pretend they are. The third place they part is more technical, but in some ways, the deepest of the three. It is about whether anything can stand outside the practices and forms of life within which we live. The late Wittgenstein's whole vision of meaning is one of embeddedness. Meaning lives in use lives in practice. Practice lives in what he calls forms of life. The woven texture of human activity in which words like knowing, feeling, seeing, being, do their work. Nothing transcends all forms of life. There is no view from nowhere. Even the most basic certainties, that I have hands, that the world existed before I was born, function as bedrock, not because they have been proved, but because they are simply how the practice of language and judgment is grounded. Now consider the Buddhist concept of asankata, the unconditioned. Nibbana, in the Pali Canon, is asankata. It does not arise from conditions. It does not pass away by conditions. It is, by definition, what stands outside all the conditioned, fabricated, dependently arisen processes that constitute the world of experience. In the discourse at Samyutta Nikaya 35:23, known as the All Sutta, SN 35.23, the Buddha tells the monks, and what, monks, is the All? The eye and forms, the ear and sounds, the nose and odors, the tongue and tastes, the body and tangibles, the mind and ideas. This, monks, is called the All. The translator, Thanissaro Bhikkhu, reads this passage as marking out the scope of conditioned experience, the six sense bases and their objects, with Nibbana, the unconditioned, lying explicitly beyond. Some commentaries read the scope differently. The canonical reading I take here is that the unconditioned is not part of the All. If that reading is right, then Nibbana is the one thing in the Buddhist universe that transcends all forms of life. Even the community of practitioners, the Sangha, which the Buddha declared one of the three refuges, SN 45, is ultimately a conditioned thing. It too is a raft. The Buddha himself is, in this sense, a raft. Everything's a raft, and the raft delivers the practitioner to a shore that is no raft at all. Late Wittgenstein's framework cannot accommodate this. By its own terms, it cannot. If meaning lives in use, and use lives in practice, and practice lives in forms of life, then nothing transcends all forms of life, because such a thing would not have meaning, would not have use, could not be spoken of from within any practice. The Buddhist unconditioned, in Wittgensteinian terms, is exactly what cannot be said, and then the Buddhist tradition says it anyway, and walks a path toward it. So those are the three places they part. Whether there is a key to the fence, whether philosophy is supposed to change the philosopher, whether anything transcends the practices in which we live and speak. In each case, Wittgenstein draws the line where his method ends. In each case, the Buddha keeps walking past it. This does not make Wittgenstein wrong. It is possible to read everything he wrote as the work of a man who took the limits of his own honesty seriously and refused to pretend his tools could do what they could not. There is a profound integrity in that, but it does mean that the Buddhist project is, in a specific sense, larger. It includes everything Wittgenstein could see, and then claims to see more, and claims a method by which one can verify the seeing in one's own experience. That is the difference, and we should not soften it. Close. Return for a moment to the room in Cambridge, April 29th, 1951. The man who had spent his life trying to be precise about what could and could not be said was dying of prostate cancer. He had refused the hospital. He was lying in the home of his doctor and the doctor's wife, Mrs. Bevan, who had been caring for him. She told him that day that some of his friends were coming the next morning. She reported his reply, and Norman Malcolm recorded it in the memoir he wrote 7 years later. Tell them I've had a wonderful life. This is not a doctrine. There is no Proposition 7.1. There is no further argument. It is testimony. A man who had drawn the limits of language as carefully as anyone in history said something positive about what was on the side of the limit where he had been living, not what could be proved. not what could be pictured, just what he had seen, what had manifested, what was, for him, true. Now consider the other deathbed. According to the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the long discourse on the Buddha's final passing, in the Digha Nikaya, DN 16, the Buddha lay between two sal trees in a grove at Kusinara. He was 80 years old. His monks were gathered around him. He gave instructions for his funeral, told them not to grieve, and then, in the standard formula, recorded by the tradition, he said his final words, in Thanissaro Bhikkhu's translation. Now then, monks, I exhort you. All fabrications are subject to decay. Bring about completion by being heedful. This too is testimony. The Buddha is not delivering a new doctrine in his last breath. He is pointing one more time at what he had been pointing at for 45 years. The condition passes. Therefore, while you can, do the work. Be heedful. Bring the path to completion. Two men at the edge. Two final utterances. Neither one a system. Both of them, after lifetimes of trying to be exact about what cannot be said, pointing. The shapes of the two pointings are different. They have to be. Wittgenstein points towards something that showed itself in the texture of a life, and he reports simply that the life was wonderful. The Buddha points towards something that can be reached by walking a specific path, and he urges in his last moment that the walking be completed, but notice what they share. Neither man, at the very end, lapsed into the language of metaphysics. Neither tried to describe in positive terms what had been so carefully fenced or doored throughout their lives of work. They each, in their own way, gestured, and then went silent. If you have ever sat with someone you loved as they were dying, you have stood at the same edge. You have known then that what was passing was not just a body, that what is going on at the end of a human life is not something that fits inside the categories of ordinary speech. The discerning among us know this in our own experience long before we read any philosophy. That is what the two men have been describing, the edge that all of us eventually find, when language runs out, and something either remains or does not, and you have to decide what to do with the silence. Wittgenstein gives you one answer. Pass over it. Live a wonderful life. Be silent in front of what cannot be said. The Buddha gives you another. There is something on the other side. Here is the path. Walk it. Bring it to completion. So let us hold the two final lines together one more time. Wittgenstein, in the cadence that has carried through the centuries, whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. The Buddha, in the Udana, there is an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unfabricated, and emancipation from the born, become, made, fabricated, is discerned. Two silences. One is a fence, the other is a doorway. Both are pointing at the same thing. What you do with the silence, whether you stand at the fence and live a wonderful life, or whether you walk through the doorway and find what is on the other side, that part neither teacher can do for you. That part is yours.